I apologize. If you could let me know if it's any better now. Looks like we're having a slight issue with our internet connection. Much better. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Good to know. Okay. So um, we'll begin. We'll begin from the beginning. The reason for that is because this is also being recorded for YouTube for other students as well. So Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Actually, that's a good point. Let me start. Um, let me start from the beginning. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. So, as I was saying, there were moments in the Hawza in Qom that I truly cherished. And one of these moments were when you went into a class and for some reason the scholar would come and he would either begin his class outside the context of the subject that we were studying, or towards the end of his class would sometimes go out on a tangent and just start to, say things that aren't directly related to the subject that we were studying. Um, and I can think of a number of examples, but one thing that I wanted to mention tonight is, well, you're going to know very soon. I remember that I remember this vividly. We were in the class of a senior scholar in the city of Qom, and I'm not going to mention any names. Around those days, someone, an elected official, had come out and said that all people are subject to criticism, and that you can criticize. You're free to criticize any and everyone. And so the example that he had mentioned was very interesting. He said that even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa was open to criticism, and he once made a decision to do something, and I can't recall what it was. Now, he didn't mention the name, but the name was that what the instance was that Umar got up and he said, "Ahada minka am min Allah." Is this your decision, or is this the decision of Allah? Which means that he didn't even believe in revelation. He did not believe that this was a prophet. Anyway, so he took this as an example to say that you are able to criticize everyone. And he may have even mentioned that you can even criticize Imam Zaman alayhi salam after his reappearance, inshallah. And so I remember that I was present in that class when, at the beginning of the class, the this teacher, this professor, with a very serious tone, he said that you may have heard that so and so has said something along the lines of everyone, even the ma'soom, even the infallibles, are subjected to criticism and are subject to criticism, excuse me. He said that when we talk to our students and we tell them to make sure that they get their education right, that they should study fiqh correctly, they should study their i'tiqadat correctly, that they should know right from wrong, this is what we're talking about. He said that I don't want one of my students to come out in 10 or 20 years and say something like this. This shows that the system that this person was studying in was a crumbling system. It wasn't a working system, or else he wouldn't have said something like this. If he is a sheikh and he has studied in the Hawza, then he wouldn't have said something like this. And I even remember this, and this goes back to i'tiqadat, the beliefs. When someone goes to Ayatollah Bahjat. Now, Ayatollah Bahjat was known for his, now, how do I say this? He was known to have kind of Irfani leanings. He was a student of the Irfani teachers in both Qom and Najaf. Someone goes to Sheikh Bahjat and he asks him, he says, what sort of things do you have that will enhance in our sayr and suluk? And so Sheikh Bahjat, and I think you can even find this clip online if you look for it. Sheikh Bahjat says, Aval kalam. Make sure that the first thing that you get right is your i'tiqad. First, kalam. Now, kalam doesn't mean, he doesn't mean a specific book, but rather he says, get your i'tiqadat right, because he then says, because if you were to follow in these steps, irfan and these things, and you were to lose yourself, that the sin goes back to you. It's because of your inability to find the correct beliefs that you fall in the pit of sin. And this goes back to some of the controversy in the past 2-3 weeks. Your mission as students in the Hawza is to get your education right. Whether you want to become an activist or not, make sure that you know right from wrong. We say in a beautiful dua that I encourage everyone to read, inshallah, every single day. Allahumma arini al-haqqa haqqan. Oh Allah, show me the right as the right path. Wa arini al-haqqa haqqan fa'attaba'ah, so that I may follow in the way of righteousness. Wa arini al-batila batilan fa'ajtanibah, and show me the path of falsehood so that I may avoid it. Knowing what is right and wrong will show you the path that you are to follow, inshallah. And if you'll allow me, I'll also add this point. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, إِنَّ الْحَقَّ لَا يُعْرَفُ بِالرِّجَالِ. Right or righteousness is not found by its people. In other words, if you find that someone who's very respected in society suddenly chooses the wrong path, then you shouldn't say, oh, well, this must be the right path because so-and-so is following this path. It's not how it works. The Imam says, إِنَّ الْحَقَّ لَا يُعْرَفُ بِالرِّجَالِ. When you look at the side of Aisha in the Battle of Jamal, you find people like Zubayr. Zubayr was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. He was someone who was in the beginning. He was part of the camp of Amir al-Mu'mineen of Rasulullah, of Fatima al-Zahra. Even the time when Umar came and attacked the door of Fatima al-Zahra, he was there and he pulled out his sword in what was apparently the defense of Fatima al-Zahra. So that's not how we tell right from wrong, not by its people. The Amir al-Mu'mineen then says, اعرف الحق تعرف أهله. Make sure that you know what righteousness is, only then will you find its people. So inshallah, your mission in this path is to understand right from wrong. Once you understand right from wrong, you can then decide which actions to, the things that you should act upon and the things that you are supposed to avoid, inshallah. And then, this what I mentioned is why some scholars choose to stay silent, for example, when it comes to a certain topic, because they understand that it's not in the best interest of Islam to say something. Now, inshallah, we can go back to the class because I've already taken a few minutes, a little bit more than a few, and I'll try to make this class a little bit shorter tonight because we'll need to take a few questions, inshallah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, if you recall, we spoke about six of the funds, for the lack of a better word, that Khums applies to. We also spoke about a few of the rulings that relate to unspent money after the expenditure of a year. And given that this is the one that applies to most of us, or all of us, there are a lot of ahkam, a lot of rulings which we'll need to mention, inshallah. Now, what is the expenditure of a year that isn't subject to khums? We said that khums does not apply to money that you spend throughout the year. Now, what sort of expenses are we talking about? And where is there an instance where khums applies even though you spent the money? So we'll talk about that tonight, inshallah. And I think this may be the last session talking about the money that khums applies to. Inshallah, we can go to the ahkam of spending khums. Now, there are two types of expenses: personal expenses and business expenses. First, we'll talk about the personal expenses. The expenses, so any and all personal expenses that are suitable for people in your society, khums does not apply to any of it. Personal expenses, in other words, are the expenses that are obligational. So your zakah, your sadaqah, the wajib sadaqah, your nadr, all of these are counted towards your expenses for the year. And so khums does not apply to any of these things. The expenses that are obligatory, mustahab, so you pay sadaqat, you give money to the poor, you help out the orphans, khums does not apply to any of these. And the expenses that are mubah, in other words, just buying a cell phone isn't necessarily mustahab or makruh or wajib. So any action that doesn't have a ruling is called a mubah transaction. In other words, it's not haram, it's not wajib, it's not makruh, it's not mustahab, it's just mubah, it's permissible. So all transactions that are mubah, khums does not apply to any of these, or makruh. So even the things that are makruh, for example, now I can't think of an example, but anything that you buy, even though this transaction is makruh, khums does not apply to these expenses. Now, all of these expenses that are in a manner, excuse me, let me edit this, in a manner that is suitable for a person of your status. Now, we kind of talked about these things, about this ruling, excuse me, but what it means is, in your society, an average person would own a car, they'd own a TV, they'd own, a computer. They'd own these things. But if you suddenly choose to make a wild decision and buy, a Patek Philippe watch for $100,000, can you also count the purchase of this watch as an expense that part of the expenses of a year? No, because people of your status don't normally make the decision to buy a $100,000 watch. People of your status in society would not buy a yacht. And so if you made these purchases, then you'll have to pay khums over them as well. Now, if the expenditure surpasses this threshold, then the person will be payable for khums on all, following expenses. So after you reach that threshold, and you have, again, normal average people would own one cell phone or two cell phones, and suddenly you make the decision to buy 10 iPhone 12, what's the number now? 12X Max, whatever the other suffixes are. If you purchase these kinds of things, which again would surpass the expenses of an average person in your society, then you'd be payable for khums on all of these purchases. And this also applies to clothing, for example. If an average person has 5 or 10 pairs of jeans, and you suddenly decide to buy 20 pairs of jeans, then the other 10, so whatever surpasses the threshold, this khums would apply to all of it. Even, now this is an interesting ruling, even if one spends all of his/her money in good causes, in humanitarian causes, he gives all of his money away to build a Husayniyah. If an average person in your society wouldn't make this decision to give away all of their money to buy khums, according to Ayatollah Sistani, based on obligatory precaution, they would also need to pay the khums of that money. So even if someone spends all of their money in philanthropic causes, if it surpasses this threshold, so if an average person in your society spends $1,000 on charity, then that's fine. You can spend $1,000 as charity, and that would be deducted towards the expenditure of a year. But if you surpass that amount, then you'll need to pay khums over the money. So I'm not trying to discourage you from donating towards good causes. I'm just saying that if you pay more than the amount, and I guess what I mean by more is when you decide to give away half of what you've earned throughout the year to good causes, and I'm kind of sure that normal people wouldn't make these decisions. So if it surpasses this threshold, then you will need to pay the khums on the excess. So make sure that you get this right. You don't need to pay khums on the original. So if you, again, going back to the example of the pairs of jeans, if a normal person has 10 pairs of jeans, then you don't need to pay khums over 10 pairs of jeans that you buy throughout the year, because normal, average, everyday people have 10 pairs of jeans. That's fine. But if you suddenly make the decision to buy another 10 pairs, and the other 10 pairs are more than what the average person has, then you'll only need to pay khums on the second 10 pairs. So the first 10 pairs go towards the expenses of the year. It's only the second 10 pairs that khums applies to, which are 2 pairs. So if it surpasses this threshold, then you will need to pay the khums on the excess as a precautionary obligation. Now here, again, to make this a Hausa class, we'll need to um, use the deductionary process. In this hadith, Shaykh al-Saduq, Shaykh al-Tusi, narrates this hadith in Kitab al-Tahdhib. He says, كتب بعض أصحابنا إلى أبي جعفر الثاني. Some of our brothers wrote to, or friends wrote to Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. Abu Ja'far is normally Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Abu Ja'far al-Thani is Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. كتب بعض أصحابنا إلى أبي جعفر الثاني عليه السلام أخبرني عن الخمس. Tell me about Khums. Now I'm sorry that I didn't translate this hadith. Tell me about Khums. أعلى جميع ما يستفيد الرجل من قليل وكثير. What is Khums? Tell me about Khums. Is it does it apply to anything that the person benefits from, whether little or a lot? من جميع الضروب وعلى الصناع. And does it apply to all professions, or is it specific to a certain profession? Because as you know, zakat doesn't apply to everything. Zakat only applies to 9 things. So it's normal to think that maybe Khums has the same case. Maybe Khums only applies to a specific profession. فكتب بخطه. The Imam عليه السلام wrote with his own handwriting. فكتب بخطه الخمس بعد المؤونة. Khums comes after the expenditure of a year. And again, we'll talk about that later on, inshallah. When we're talking about years in the Islamic context, we're talking about lunar years. Now, so we said that the expenditure of a year is deducted from Khums. Now, we spoke about personal expenses, but what about business expenses? Well, you'd be happy to hear, and this is for all the professionals, that business expenses are also, Khums does not apply to business expenses either. Now, we'll talk about that. Business expenses are any expenses that go towards making a profit. So, security, mediation, legal costs, rent, vehicles, government taxes. You deduce all of these before you calculate your Khums. So for example, if you're a farmer and you lease the land, then first you'll need to deduct the lease amount, and then whatever money that you make, Khums would apply to that amount. And any expenses that are for the sake of your business, Khums would not apply to any of it. Again, so you've rented an office, or you have employees. You deduct all of these things before you calculate your Khums. Now, this is an interesting one. Business expenses also include any loss of value in business tools that are used specifically to make a profit. Now, when we're talking about business tools, I don't mean the car that you've registered under the name of your business that you use to drive to and from work, but rather the machinery. Now, if you buy a car, for example, for $20,000, and then you, how do I say this? And then you rent the car out for $4,000 a year. Let's say you give it to someone who works as an Uber driver. So you bought the car for $20,000, and then you rent it out for $4,000 a year. But by the end of the year, as a um, you know, as a result of the usage of the car is now worth $18,000. Now, does khums apply to all of the $4,000? No. You deduct $2,000 that make up the amount that you lost on your capital, which is your car, and you add that to the value of the car, and you'll only be payable for the $2,000 that remain. The other $2,000 would go into your yearly the profits of a year, and you may be payable for that if you didn't spend it, but you don't pay for the amount that you lose on business machinery. And again, one hadith that for some reason I didn't translate. It's a lengthy hadith. Someone asks Imam, maybe this was Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. I can't recall. Someone asks him about khums, and he says that there is a difference of opinion among our scholars. فاختلف من قبلنا في ذلك فقالوا يجب على الضياع الخمس بعد المؤونة مؤونة الضيعة. So I'll mention what the story is. He's saying that a person has a farm. Does he need to pay the khums after deducing the amount that he spent over his farm, or should he also include in his expenditure the expenses of his family as well? فكتب وقرأه علي بن مهزيار عليه الخمس بعد مؤونته ومؤونة عياله وبعد خراج السلطان. Any expenses, whether these were government taxes or money that he spent for his family, or money that he spent on the plot of land, you deduce all of these, and whatever remains, khums will apply to that. I'm sorry, so I didn't realize that that you guys weren't seeing the screen. This is cropped, and so that's why I was seeing it on my screen, but I apologize, you guys weren't seeing it. Now, so for now, we have determined that all average expenses, so people that befit you in your society, these are deducted before calculating khums. Again, if someone buys a TV, now it's not common for people to update their TVs 3 times a year. And so if someone decides to suddenly update because now there's 8K, and after 8K there's 16K, and then there's 32K TV in a year, then you need to pay khums on anything that is abnormal, anything that is extraordinary. But normal everyday spending, that's fine. You can deduce all of that. So, for example, your internet bill, your cell phone bill, if you'd allow me to be bold enough and say that even if at a point it becomes a norm to have Netflix, a Netflix membership for everyone in society, then you can even deduce the amount that you pay for your Netflix service. Now, so personal expenses, you can deduce all of these. Business expenses, you can also deduce them. Now, how do we determine the date of mm, the beginning of your Islamic financial year? I made a mistake in the beginning of the class when I said that that the beginning of your financial year is the day that you receive your first paycheck. I was wrong. Um, the beginning of your Islamic financial year is the day that you start working, which is kind of challenging because I guess people don't normally mark these days. Now, before that, one thing that I would suggest is uh, for people that don't know the beginning of their financial year, even though they know it in the Gregorian calendar, they wouldn't know it in the lunar calendar. In that case, you could just Google it and you'll find it. That's fine, but you'll need to use the lunar calendar. So let's say that the first day that you started working was the first of Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, excuse me, then that would mark the first day. So every year on the first of the month of Ramadan would be the day that you need to pay your khums on. Now, going back to determining the date of the beginning of your Islamic financial year, as-sana al-khumsiyya, it depends on whether you are a person with a regular income, if you have a regular job, or you're unemployed and you don't have a job. Now, for people that do not have a regular income, and these people are either employed or otherwise, I guess I wouldn't say these are employed. For example, sole traders, person who do freelancing. These people, because of the irregularity of their salary. Do you mind moving the video icon so we can see the? Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. Oh. Oops. Okay. Now, so people with a regular income, people with an irregular income, these don't have a set date. And so how do they calculate their khums? Now, by the way, you don't need to imagine a poor person who lives off sadaqah. For this example, you could even the son of a millionaire who doesn't work but receives money from his father or his mother, then these people don't have a set date for their khums. Rather, the way that these people calculate their khums is whenever they receive a chunk of money, whenever they call their daddy and they ask for $1 million, that day marks the day of the beginning of the Islamic financial year for that money. So for the $1 million that they're getting from their father today, which is the 16th of Shawwal, by the end of this year, so next year 15th of Shawwal, if they've spent all of this money, then so be it. But if they haven't spent that money, then whatever remains, khums will apply to that money. Now, if during the year they also added another $500,000 to their net worth, again from their father, then let's assume that they received the $500,000 6 months from now. They wouldn't need to pay khums on the $500,000 by the end of the 15th of Shawwal that they marked for the $1 million. That would have a different different date. And so people that don't have a regular job, a regular income, khums would apply to each chunk of money that they receive. I hope I was clear. People, I'll read the paragraph. People with an irregular income, whether employed or otherwise, these people don't have a set date for their financial year. Rather, it begins whenever they receive funds. And so if they receive multiple, you know, mm, if they receive money multiple times a year, they will, each time they receive money, the date of each reception is the day of their financial year for that specific fund. And so they would have 5, 6, 10 financial years within a year. So 10 dates within a year. Now, as opposed to people that have a regular job and those that have a regular income. The beginning of the financial year for people with a stable job is the day that they started working on. And again, in this day and age, it's not too hard to work these out. You could ask for statements from your bank, and they'll tell you that the first paycheck was received on so and so date, and you go back 1 month, or depending on whether you receive your wages every month or every week or fortnightly, you'll be able to work these things out. So the beginning of the financial year for people with a stable job, with a regular income, is the day they start working on. All expenses from there on is calculated towards the expenditure of their year. Therefore, it is haram upon them to spend any of the earnings of the previous years towards the expenditure of the following year before paying the khums that applies to them. So let's say that the beginning of your Islamic financial year was the first of the month of Ramadan. Now, throughout the month of Ramadan, Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, Safar, Rabi', Jamada, and then Rajab, Sha'ban, up until the first of Ramadan, you're free to spend all of your money. Once the first of Ramadan comes, you aren't able to spend any of it until you pay the khums. That applies to whatever is left from your money. Now, if you make money, if you have different jobs, if you have a full-time job and a part-time job, or if you have different businesses, then you are lucky, because the exception for this rule are people who have a variety of jobs or businesses, and they have multiple sources of income. These people have the opportunity to set a specific date as the beginning of their financial year. They can choose what day that they want. They are also able to choose multiple dates for each of their jobs or each of their businesses. So let's say that you have a construction business, you're also dipping your toes into Bitcoin, and you have you're doing a part-time job in, God knows whatever people do. Then in this case, you either have you have the choice of either setting a specific date or having a date for each of your jobs. With that, alhamdulillah, this concludes this session, and we have about 5 minutes to take a few questions, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Please upload last time's picture. Lecture. I think it was already uploaded. Maybe it wasn't sent to. I'll check that, and I'll see if it wasn't uploaded. Then inshallah I'll upload it. Salam Sayyid wa alaikum salam. Can you briefly touch up on zakat? Who are eligible and its importance? Now, zakat, the Sunnis they sometimes some of the Sunnis say that the Shias don't care about zakat. Now, zakat, as mentioned clearly and explicitly in some of our hadith, and I'd like to make this known because it's important. Sometimes people would come to the imams, they would approach Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, for example, in a specific hadith. He says to the imam that I come from Khurasan. Now, Khurasan is the region that includes Mashhad as well as parts of Afghanistan. He says that I come from Khurasan, and in Khurasan we have a lot of rice. Do I need to pay khums on rice? Maybe he was a rice farmer. The Imam says that the Prophet had made zakat an obligation on 9 things. On the 3 animals, i.e. sheep, cows, and camels, as well as al-ghallat al-arba', which are barley and barley. I can't remember. So it was, one was barley, the other one was hinta, sha'ir. What's hinta? I can't recall what hinta was. Wheat, right? Wheat, barley, as well as zabib, which are raisins. I can't recall the 4th one, and al-naqdain, which are gold and silver. So yes, khums is important. Zakat is important within Shia Islam, but it's limited. It's not as expansive as is in the Sunni school of thought. Salam Sayyid wa alaikum salam. How does one determine the average threshold for personal expenditures? Well, this you're supposed to refer to the urf. Urf is, average people in a society. And I think even though it's a little bit arbitrary when you get to the edges, but you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about when you look at the more expensive things. If you take, for example, the average of expenses in a society, you'd be able to tell what the threshold is. But yes, it's a hard question to answer. Certainly, when we speak about urf, it's hard to tell it's hard to tell the borders. But it is what it is, I guess. When determining whether or not we have passed the threshold of an average person's needs, does the khums apply on clothing only? Oh, does the khums on clothing only apply to clothes purchased within the year, or clothes we may have been hoarding over the years? Listen, any so even the ones, so we need to look at it as year by year basis. Forget about what you've been hoarding. Every year, how much do you spend on clothing? You'll need to pay the khums of that year. Then we'll look at the next year, or the year before that, or the year before those 2 years. And so it's hard to tell whether you'll need to pay khums over clothes that you've been hoarding. But certainly, if you're having issues, then you can go back to the marja, the scholar, and you may even be eligible for a deduction if you're lucky enough. Salam, alaikum salam, I am a medical student and my yearly fees exceed the average fees for any other course by almost 30 to 40 times. Alhamdulillah, God helps us manage, but will the amount be liable for khums? No. Um, given the choice of your profession, normal medical students, if you spend the same amount as other medical students, then no, you won't need to be you don't have to pay khums on the fees that you spend. Salam Sayyid, can you please send me the PDF for the previous 105 session, inshallah. Allah also send. I did have the PDF file, inshallah. I'll be sending it to the group. Salam Sayyid, wa alaikum salam. Don't we need to pay khums when we come baligh, for instance, on the gifts and unused items? Listen, whenever you become baligh, khums will apply to you. But when does khums start for you? When you start to have an income. And so if you don't have an income, khums will only apply to money that you receive after you become baligh. So for money that you received before you became baligh, in a lot of cultures, kids receive gold when they're born. Do you need to pay khums on that? It doesn't look like you need to. I didn't see any of the scholars referring to this, but inshallah I'll look this up. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. What if we don't know the date of our the beginning of our work, or have started work as a part-time job? It doesn't matter whether you started work as part-time or full-time. Whenever you start working, that's the day of your financial year. As for those who don't know the date that they started working on, you will need to refer back to the marja or his representative and work out an agreement where they'll look at what you've earned and they'll see if you need to pay khums on any of it. And then from that day onwards, that would be the beginning of your financial year. Salams wa alaikum salam. If you have a business and every end year, instead of money, you have stocks, do we have to pay khums on the stock value? Yes. So stocks are commodities. And so khums would apply to any and all commodities. Whether you receive gold coins, or you receive bitcoins, or you receive plots of land, you'll need to be paying khums on all of these things. And interestingly, I'd like to mention something about stocks. Now I'll mention the example of bitcoins just because it's a little bit clear, and inshallah I'll be ending the session with this point. If you had 5 bitcoins and the financial year begins, you don't need to pay any of these bitcoins, part of any of these bitcoins as khums, until the end of your financial year. By the end of your financial year, their value has risen by 500%. Bitcoins were worth, let's say, $100. At the end of the financial year, they're now worth $500 or $10,000. And now you'll need to be paying khums for the price, the new price. So you'll need to pay 1 Bitcoin or whatever the amount is, which is 20% of what they're worth. And you don't pay the khums and you let it go, then the price drops. Even though the price dropped, you will need to pay the khums on the value that it had at the time, so on the date that you were payable for khums. So even though the value has now dropped, you will need to pay the khums, on the value that it had on the day that khums became an obligation for you. With that, inshallah, I will be ending this session. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. I apologize for not answering the other questions. We have another 5 questions, but we don't have enough time. Please don't forget me in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.